Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. I'm thinking of setting up a procedures page on my website where you can find some very basic procedures that you should learn, I feel as though you should learn for your kitchen. Today I want to clarify butter. There's a good reason to use clarified butter. A lot of recipes call for clarified butter. Some of them call for unsalted butter, in which case you can substitute clarified butter. The butter we get today is not very good compared to the butter we had when I was a child. I can remember many decades ago, the butter that would come out of the refrigerator would be this big 1 pound block of butter. And we had to be careful how we cut it because it was so hard from the refrigerator that the knife would finally break through it, snap down, and crack the ceramic plate that the butter was on. Then the manufacturers started adding water to butter in order to increase their profits. And it got so bad that the government stepped in and said you cannot call it butter unless it has a minimum percentage of butterfat in it. And today butter has typically 80% butterfat, and it's 20% anything else they can legally put into it, which is usually water, salt, and the milk solids that in a lot of recipes, you don't want it in there. If you're going to be just buttering toast or putting butter in a frying pan, it doesn't matter. But when I'm making something like pie crust, I don't want 20% of my butter to be water because the water is going to mix with the flour and possibly make it gummy. If I want a nice, crumbly, light, delicate pie crust, I want to use clarified butter. And that's why I'm going to be clarifying butter today, because I made custard pie, I made a smoked salmon quiche, I used up all the clarified butter that I have. I always keep clarified butter in the refrigerator, so let me show you how I clarify butter. I'm going to be first of all melting my butter in a ceramic pan. I like using this ceramic saucepan for a number of reasons. A dear friend gave me this. She had found it and gave me actually two of these. I have a slightly larger one with a glass lid. This has a plastic handle on it that snaps off. You can use this to place the bowl in an oven, and then you got the handle to use to put it on the table. It's very handy. Julia Child, if I remember correctly, used one of these in one of her French chef episodes. So this is kind of a dear pan to me. I also like this because being ceramic, it retains the heat longer. And that keeps my butter warmer, which makes it easier to finish what I'm doing as far as clarifying the butter. It keeps the foam on the surface longer. When I use a metal pan, it cools down too rapidly, and then the foam starts to sink down underneath, and it makes it harder to clarify the butter. I have to go back to the heat, work back and forth till I get the butter fully clarified. I'm going to be putting this in a jar that I always use for clarified butter, because this jar will hold, once I get rid of all the stuff I don't want, it'll hold exactly all the butter fat that I get out of a 1 pound block of butter. So let me get my butter cut here. And I'm going to put this in my pan. I'm going to melt this at a low temperature, medium low to low on the stove. I don't want to boil this. If it gets too hot, the water in the butter starts to boil. I don't want to boil it. I just want to get it melted, and then the milk solids and a lot of the water as foam will come to the surface. Any of the water that doesn't come to the surface as foam will settle on the bottom. So let's start melting my butter. This is going to take a while because, again, I'm doing it at a low temperature. Here's my melted butter. I use a little chopstick just to feel around the bottom to see if there's any kind of solid lumps of butter down there. It's all melted. This is all the foam that's on the surface. I'm going to spoon this off because this foam is useless. This is where most of the impurities are. As I mentioned earlier, if you have a recipe that calls for unsalted butter, you can use clarified butter because salt is water soluble. It's in the water that's in the butter.
It's not in the fat itself. Now, I'm just getting down now to where the butterfat is underneath. You can just see it peeking through there. Again, this is why I like this ceramic pan, is it just keeps the butter hot. In fact, I can still see a tiny bit of bubbling where it got so hot along the bottom that water at the bottom started boiling. And heat keeps the foam on the surface longer, so it makes it easier to spoon it off. I can smell the butterfat now that it's been exposed to the air. It just smells so good. Pure clean butter is such a pleasure to work with. Okay, I've got up pretty much most of that foam. If I get too much fussier, I'm going to start taking up a lot of the butterfat with it. A friend of mine went to a culinary school. She wanted to be a pastry chef. And she called me after her first day in class to tell me what they had done for their first day. And it was clarified butter, which makes sense because when making pastry, you want to have pure butter. And they had to use a spoon to spoon the butter out of the pan and put it in their holding vessel. I do something easier than that. I use one of these bulb basters. It has this rubber bulb on the end. And I just slurp up the butterfat and then transfer it to a jar. It is going to make some of a mess. I always do whenever I clarify butter. You can see that clear butterfat coming up into that plastic tube. How simple is that? I can't imagine trying to do that with a spoon. You're not going to be able to get up every molecule of butterfat. As long as I get enough to fill this jar, I'm satisfied. I'm getting right down to the bottom there. I can see some solids starting to come up. If I wanted to get fussy, I have something like this that I can use, a little tiny ladle. I don't know that it's worth it at this point, because no matter what I do, I'm going to get some of those solids. So I just think it's not worth it at this point to get too fussy. One thing you can do is you can suck up some of the butterfat and then wait to see if the solids will settle or rise. And they're not going to do anything. So at this point, I don't care. My jar is full. I'm going to put the lid on that and wipe that down. That's probably hot. That's hot right now. So my jar is full. I'm not even going to seal that tight because it'll just make this hard to get off. Then once that's cooled down, I'll wipe it down and put that in the refrigerator. And there's my clarified butter. Since this is a relatively short video and I have a little extra time, I thought I would kind of give you a preview of things to come and explain one more reason why I wanted to clarify butter. My next project is to make my famous, and I mean famous, it is famous among my friends, my famous chicken and spinach pie. I use for the filling ricotta, spinach, chicken flavorings, but for the shell, for the pie shell, bottom crust and top crust, I use phyllo dough or phyllo dough, depending on how you pronounce it. And between each of the sheets, as I'm building it up, I brush it with melted butter. I don't want 20% water in between those sheets because I feel like the water is going to soften the phyllo dough and make it stick together. I want it to be pure butterfat in there for a flakier pie crust. So that's another reason why I clarified butter, so that I can make my chicken and spinach pie. So that's what I'm going to be doing next week. Watch for it on YouTube and on my White Trash Cooking website.
For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.